I want to introduce folks that are here. Missy Collura. Missy and I have known each other for a long time. She's a fantastic banker. Missy has educated me on many, many things throughout the years. And one of the things that we were talking about over the last probably 2 to 2.5 months is what the payment card environment looks like, and some things that are being done in that area that can actually really revamp and bring a lot more savings, and I'll almost look at it as a revenue replacer that can come into a company. And there's some really unique things that are happening, some state-of-the-art type things that are happening. And so we talked about that possibly being a good topic for this group, because so many of the controllers and CFO types have that sort of program already where they're at, or they're thinking about implementing one, or they tried one and it didn't maybe work so well. And so maybe there's some state-of-the-art new things that you can learn in the process. So I thought it would be good knowledge, content, and timely to share. And then Scott and Paula both are going to share this with us as well. And beyond just payment card, just automation, things that you can do to automate some processes that can really speed things up and help to add dollars to the bottom line as well. So I'll pause there and ask Missy if you'd like to do some further introductions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian. And it's so good to see a couple of familiar faces that I know that I've met at prior Fing events and meetings. So excited to see y'all this morning at bright and early 7:30. So excited to see you. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Missy Collura. I've been in banking for over 24 years. I've worked mainly in the commercial banking space for some of the large players, Bank One, Bank of America, most recently Wells Fargo for the last 10 years. I moved over to Commerce Bank, which is new to the market. They've joined the market in the last 3 years, but have been around for over 155 years. So very excited to help this team and start the team. Only been there for a couple of months, but my job is really just to get out there, find business. And once I find it, bring that business in and actually hold the portfolio and work on that portfolio and service it. So very excited about that. Scott is a member of my team, and so super excited to have him today. And also Paula, who's with Boxley Group, who's a client of ours here at Commerce. So very excited about that. Before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple of quick background information on both Paula and Scott. Paula's has more than 25 years of experience in the energy industry and consulting. Her expertise includes software selection and implementation, data governance and migration, asset acquisition, integration and innovation, and disruptive technologies. Paula held positions in IT and management at Unical, Torch, Energy Advisors, Plainville American Pipeline, and several independent E&P companies. Her comprehensive experience in finance and accounting and technology has enhanced the Boxley Group advisory and consulting team. Paula is a graduate of the University of New Orleans with a BS degree in business administration with a concentration in accounting. So Paula, we're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Missy.
And then Scott, who's the character that's on my team, you will know he's actually known for his dad jokes. And he's a UT guy, but has more than 25 years of experience in sales and business development. Scott's role with Commerce is to be focused on the payment area of payments with an emphasis on accounts payable, invoice automation, and P-card solutions. Scott's career has been rooted in a focus on helping his partners identify ways to overcome challenges and problems creatively and with a focus on leveraging technology. His relationship-based approach to business development has yielded measurable results for his client partners. Scott is a graduate of University of Texas with a BJ degree in public relations. So thank you so much for both of you to do this today. I really appreciate it.
And Missy, I thought of one more housekeeping item that just to share with everyone, the Q&A, and we hope that there's plenty of it. You can do it either way. You can either just, raise your hand, unmute and say something and say, hey, just, further on that point, can give you a little more information, whatever's on your heart, what you're thinking about at the time, or you can enter it into the chat. And between Scott, Missy, and Paula, everybody, and even I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to get your question across that way if you're not comfortable just piping in at a time that you feel like it's good to do that. So I think that's it for housekeeping. All right. So Scott, Paula, your turn.
I'm going to go ahead and load the presentation up. So you should see a green screen or a blue screen at the moment, and shortly our cover page. Is that displaying for everybody?
We see a slide, yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Scott, you need to eliminate the additional screen.
Yeah, you've got your notes on the right side showing for us.
Boy, hang on.
We get to read your notes. We can skip ahead.
I think it's just page 2. I don't think it's his notes.
Oh, okay.
Let's see here.
Oh.
Yeah, no notes, but
It's just the
well,
next slide. Okay,
all right, well, let's see here.
that worked.
All right, Paula, do you want to take, you want to share that or someone else want to share it? Then I'm struggling to get that done. I don't know why I cannot find the.
Just
Let me
moving
go-
it
let
over to
me-
the side is working for me. It's hiding it behind all of our pictures. That was fine.
All right, let's do that. All right, stand by. Let's
I was gonna say I'm far from the Zoom whiz.
all right.
There you go.
There we go.
We'll roll with it. All right, thank you. All right, very good. So then today I'll just go through our table of contents and trust that that is what you're seeing at the moment. We've had some introductions, go over a little bit about what we'll be sharing with you, what you will learn, which will include a process review for automation, the idea of considering manual versus automated tasks, enterprise system evaluation, very key to all of these things, looking at the benefits of taking a look at that, the deliverables that you're going to need to consider at that point, an example of a scenario where a case study where we've seen that brought to bear, and Paula will be covering all those things. And then I'll transition into looking at the history of kind of level setting, the history of credit cards, right? And then how does that translate it into what we do today when we talk about the idea of a virtual card solution? Talking about some best practices as it relates to keeping accurate vendor records, right? Very basic, but we find that a lot of people aren't doing that. Some solution characteristics you need to think about as you consider employing a virtual card solution. Talking about the idea of specifically the service that you'll be getting, how that will be delivered to you, how it will be delivered to your vendors, and then ultimately revenue share, because clearly it may not be always the primary motivating factor, but certainly it can be among those that are most important. But I will move us along here. And you've already heard about how great we are. I'm going to warn you that I do like to share a dad joke, by the way. And since I can't see everyone's faces, I'll just assume that you're laughing raucously back at your home or office or wherever you find yourself today. But and by the way, for what it's worth, we work in the same building as Jim Adler. And I think we're all familiar with the Hammer, right, Jim? I was writing up with one of his attorneys the other day who told me that if you're like me and you wear glasses and you've had to wear a mask in the last year, you may be entitled to condensation. So just something to keep in mind. All right. Again, Paula, I'm going to yield to you then at this point, and I'll just keep moving the slides through as you're ready.
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you, Brian and team. Great to be here today. Just a little bit about the Boxley Group. I won't bore you too much, but we're a professional services firm, and we work with people like you to implement change. And change usually is around the finance and accounting area and technology. One of the primary things about technology and what we do at Boxley Group is that we keep up with the latest technology, disruptive technology being my most favorite. I lead both the energy practice and the technology practice at Boxley. Because of joining Boxley 3 years ago, I have transitioned out of energy almost entirely into construction, into health services, into renewables, which is very exciting. And so the technology that we see and the disruptive technology that's available to your companies and to growing and scaling organizations is incredible. It enables you to scale without a lot of cost and a lot of overhead. And so that's kind of what the theme is around what we talk about. Scott, you can move forward, please.
Well, a little bit, Missy touched on this a little bit. For those of us in the market, I was told that they went out to find the best looking team in the market, but also, not kid, but mostly people that are really at the top of the game when we decided to bring Commerce Bank into the Houston market. So people like Missy, myself, that have been in the market for a very long time. I'm a little bit of a unicorn in that I don't come from a banking background, but certainly with a long background in sales and business development. But a little bit about us briefly, again, around for about 156 years, kind of sort of co-headquartered in Kansas City and St. Louis, publicly traded, but managed by the same family for 6 generations, the Kemper family. You may have heard of Kemper Arena. If you're a sports fan at all and you follow any Big 12 schools or former Big 12 schools that played those games up there, the basketball. But, you know, it's an interesting proposition. People are often surprised to see that we have the highest credit rating among all banks in Houston. We may be shoulder to shoulder with a couple of people, but mostly we stand above them from that perspective. One day last April, we had something like $4 billion in deposits where people were really looking for a safe haven, a secure place. We're about 42nd in terms of asset size among all banks, and about 24th when you think about it relative to market cap. So I'll stop throwing statistics, but to say that, you know, it's a fantastic bank where we sit in that kind of that super regional space where we're nimble enough to deliver the kind of service that you would expect from a smaller, more community style bank, but also large enough to bring to bear the technologies that you would find from your larger national banks. And as it relates to payments, somehow we've been able to carve out some real differentiators, and it's just a space we understand very well and have invested a lot of energy in. So thus here I am, and I'll move us along, Paula.
Great. So what we hope you learned today, leaders from peer companies transform their businesses through process improvements and technology. We're going to hopefully give you an example of how we do that at Boxley and how we work together with partners like Commerce Bank. We'll give you a blueprint on how to evaluate your internal processes and how to identify and quantify improvement. We do methodology called Process by the Numbers that has really, really helped transform our clients' businesses in a very short time. We don't just deliver suggestions, we actually show you how to execute them. And sometimes you execute them on your own without help from a consulting firm. Evaluation of your current landscape, your software landscape, your ERP. And if you're not on a SaaS solution, why maybe you should consider that. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then Scott, these are your 3 bullet points.
Again, right, talked about this a little while ago, but again, just kind of going back to level set, think about where the genesis of credit cards came from. And then, of course, how they evolved, again, looking at some of the really important characteristics. I mean, there are many mechanics in the world, right? But there's only a few that you truly trust because of the way they operate. And you can identify those characteristics in them. It's true of this as well. But then also just thinking about the things you would need to do to consider the program and implement it as you go forward to really have that yield the greatest return.
So process by the numbers, I mentioned it earlier. So what Boxley Group does is we reverse a software transformation process by completing requirements. Most companies, when they want to change software or they believe that they want to buy new software, seldom look at the software that they have in-house to make sure that it's what they need. Sometimes you have software and you're not using it effectively, or you've transitioned employees in and out and they don't know what they're doing because they've never been trained properly. So we do a process by the numbers. We evaluate and capture detail of all the processes of your employees. Now we do this departmentally. So let's say you have an accounts payable department, which you're not seeing efficiencies. Everything is manual, or a lot of it is manual, and you're not exactly sure what is on each desk, or you're increasing an employee every year. So accounts payable should be fully automated. Everybody knows that and everybody hears about it. And software is what does that for you, as well as services like Commerce Bank. So we walk in and we do an in-depth detail of processes and desktops, inputs and outputs at each desk. And we create a documentation that's very, very helpful, not only for pinpointing where the issues are, where there's no automation, or where there's automation that's being downloaded to Excel and they're ignoring the automation and the usage of the software that they have in-house. Give you an example. I had a client very large global client whose accounts payable department was growing every year by 1 or 2 people. They came in and they said, I think what we need is new software. And so we said, let's do a little process by the numbers. Let's see what your people are doing. Once the process by the numbers team at Boxley did this, they brought the results to the technology team, which is us. And we noted that they were complaining about their software and that the software wasn't gathering the data that it needed to gather in order to enable everything to be automated. Come to find out, there was 2 things and this went on for about 5 or 6 years, the actual issues that they were having with no resolution. They had a templated software that could read the invoices, but they were correcting the invoices manually. And what they hadn't done was upgraded the software to the natural language processing, and I don't want to get too technical, but to the new methodology of capturing data, which would have enabled the software to learn the invoices as they came through. So they were spending at least an extra 20 hours a week correcting invoices. Once they installed the new software, which didn't take, Boxley was not part of that resolution because it was all software. Once they installed it, they were able to actually move the invoices through rapidly. The software had artificial intelligence, and so it learned the invoices. They moved several people out of accounts payable into other roles, which is what they ultimately wanted. And in the end, saved a lot of money. And so the process by the numbers review and workbook was what allowed them. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples of some of the executive presentation that comes with process by the numbers. But I'm going to pause here as well and see if you have any questions, please.
Oh, I know one of the things you mentioned the idea of for that someone you were engaged with that was looking to reduce headcount potentially, right? I think one of the ways that I've found people also tend to look at the ideas of automation and efficiency building as is more in line with the idea of being a force multiplier. You know, if you think about it in the military, a term that you hear often used is about inserting a special ops group, right? A small team of people that are highly skilled, highly trained, and highly equipped to go in and to kind of accomplish a lot more than they might otherwise, or a similarly sized group that isn't trained, that isn't equipped, and doesn't have the tools to do that. So it's another way to, besides reducing headcounts, it's a way to leverage the headcounts you have to achieve growth goals.
Right. The analytics, the analytics provided in this tool enable them to see what the individual employees benefits were to the company. So this tool just, it's not exactly, it's an Excel workbook that we start with, and then we have other issues that are directed there. So if the employee feels like they're not in the right place, you can see what their skills are, and it enables you to put them in the right place. It also recognizes if they have gaps in their processes, and how that can be better. They can be better equipped, in other words, to not have those gaps. So the 6 areas where time is spent mostly in process is the ones in front of you. If you are an energy company, the land lease area is also covered. So month-end close and financial reporting, accounts payable, of course, the journal entries and approval processes and account reconciliations. And so if you move to the next slide, please, Scott. This is an example of the results for one of our clients. This client was considering automation for month-end close, and the accounts payable, processing, and payroll was exactly where they were doing 35% of the manual tasks depicted. So 2,973 hours were manual, even though they had automation. They had an ERP, and they had capabilities with AV workflow. They had a payroll system, but they were dropping everything down into Excel, and it was taking 55% of the hours were manually. On the right, you'll see the different types of tasks, and you can readily see the areas where they were spending most of their manual tasks. So the resulting here was dropping down, checking to see what we could do with automation to help those areas, and also enable the executives in the C-suite to understand we really do need to probably do some type of project to increase automation. Any questions on this? Okay. Evaluating your system landscape is something I talked about. We create a software landscape. We'll come in and we'll take a look at what you're using, what automation you have. In this case, this was a startup company, and their current state is on the left. So the boxes reveal how much time they spend with certain software. If you notice, Excel is the biggest one, and they're on QuickBooks. So they were growing very, very fast, and they were definitely needing to move over to an ERP, and they were doing payroll. Most of that was manual. And so we walk in, we do a software landscape. We help you, if you don't have an IT department and you're like with QuickBooks Online, we evaluate. We've done this for very large companies as well. And they're either not on SaaS, or they've been on the same software for over 10 years. It's time to look at new software. But as I said before, that's not always the case as well. It may be that you haven't done the upgrades to your software, or you haven't trained your people. So it's not always a change. It's more of an analytics to help you move your company forward. We don't want your automation or your lack of automation to not let you scale. Any questions on this? Okay. So project benefits specifically for process by the numbers is from the top to around the circle. You know, documented the processes, the improvements that you can be made. Once again, these improvements can be done by yourselves. It does not require professional services, because a lot of times it's really just about learning what your people are doing or not doing. And so it's very helpful there. We've had several of our clients call it the audit help. So when the auditors come in and they're doing SOX and they need to understand what's going on or what may have changed, they keep up the workbook on the process study to just keep up with their employees and to keep up with the tasks when they want to move them around. So those processes and the improvements are quick learns, quick results. And I needed to add these process studies for, let's say, an accounts payable team of 10. Our entire project takes about 3 weeks. So it's not a big spend as far as bringing us in to help you out. The interviews that we do with your employees and with supervisors and managers take about an hour and a half, and that's all of their time. So it really is comprehensive. The way the questions are asked lead to certain responses that enable you to see a lot more value in what they're doing. So once again, identifying opportunities for automation, very important to us on the technology team. Identifying backups to your colleagues, your employees, and ensuring that controls are appropriate and that there's a segregation of duties. Right people, right tasks, very important. More often than not, we find that there's somebody struggling and their utility is not what it should be because they're not in the right place. And then eliminating, of course, unnecessary processes. Some point in time with one of our clients, they were spending 4 hours a week on a certain report. We asked them, who do you send this report to? Oh, I just file it in the shared drive. And so once we interviewed everyone, we found out nobody was looking at that report. It had just been done for years, and therefore they were going to continue to do it. So that report was eliminated, saved an employee 4 hours a week. Those are the kinds of things that this process by the numbers does.
I have a quick question. You know, that first bubble recommended documented processes. so I think most companies, most people have some ideas like, okay, this seems like it's bogging us down. It seems like it's always slow to get done. You know, you're going to have some ideas, but how do people identify what they don't know? Because, you know, we have backgrounds, right? We're finance people. We see the pieces and parts that we see. We understand them. We know what data we need or whatever, but we don't know the tools or even areas that maybe we have blinders onto that really are taking up a lot of our people's time that could be automated. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you meld that together on, well, what's your, you know, off the shelf, the things that you can think of internally, ideas to go possibly look into for automating or machine learning, whatever we're going to do with it, and bringing together what you all would bring, or others that have an IT background or a machine learning background, automation background, to look for other opportunities that maybe aren't obvious to people that are right in the midst of it. Do you have any recommendations to the participants today on how they identify some of those things that otherwise they wouldn't see?
Sure. What we do, I can tell you how we do it, and you can do this internally. Absolutely. When we pair together the team that comes to do process by the numbers, we use a subject matter expert for the area, an auditor, and then a technology process person. And so we have 3 people that recognize. One will have, for example, like I said, the subject matter, so they'll know what the processes should be. Now, we do this all the time, so they're pretty savvy. And so you can do that internally as well. If you want to sit with your employees and understand exactly what the inputs and outputs of their desk are, that will enable you to understand whether they're using automation or not. So we ask them how many hours it takes to do something. Once again, inputs, outputs, what software they touch, why they touch that software. Do they drop it down into Excel? Do they move it somewhere else? Who do they deliver their deliverables to? Who do they work together with in order to create whatever the monthly deliverable or weekly deliverable is? And so you can do that internally. Most people don't have that kind of time, nor do they have the 3 experts, right, to do it. But in the end, like I said, in a very short period of time, it can be very helpful. So the way to do the automation, if you wanted to do this on your own, everybody knows Gartner. If you're thinking that there might be something out there to help you and move you to some type of software, Gartner has a search function on their website that really helps you look. There's also other websites as well that help you choose software and applications, Power Apps. And so as leaders yourselves in your companies, these are things you can do research yourself. I'm happy to send those URLs to you guys. Happy to give them to you, Brian, if you want to share them. But that's how I would do it if I was leading an accounting team. Interesting question, though. My background is accounting. I moved into technology because technology never could understand what accountants needed. And I know you guys are finance people, but the operational accounting people are usually left behind in understanding what the possibilities are to make changes in their departments. And that education that you should make available to your employees is probably valuable. If you have a lunch and learn once a month that gives them ideas about technology or how to make their jobs easier, you're going to find much happier employees, even if it's a webinar. Just suggestions. Did that help answer your question a little bit?
Yes, that was really helpful. Thank you, Paula.
Sure. Scott, on next slide. Yeah. So here's some deliverable options. And I'm really not trying to sell this to you guys. I promise that. What I'm trying to tell you is there is a way to really improve the technology and the processes within your organizations. I see John McCormick out there. He knows me well. We worked for him a few years ago. What we try to do is in 3 weeks' time is give you the tools to do this yourself or help you do it. We're not McKinsey, so we don't just give you suggestions. We actually show you how to execute, or we execute ourselves for you.
Mhm.
So the process improvement opportunities are recommended. Closing cycle analysis. We've helped some of our clients move their month-end close down to 5 days, believe it or not. The ideal is, I believe, 9 days, 9 working days, but we've had so much return on investment for them by helping them in that manner. And it's as a result of doing this type of process. Comparisons across divisions and locations. You guys know what that is. If you're a global company and you have 3 different accounts payable teams, they're doing things differently. So making things align with each other, incorporating the differences between those divisions comes out in this process study. Manual and system supported tasks comparison. You saw that one slide showing you the comparison of manual versus automated. A database of activities by desk. So if you ever want to know what people are doing, that's something you can always look back on, that one sheet, specific to any area of your organization. Processes and tasks that could benefit from automation, which is of course my favorite. We also include high-level flow of current and future state, which I know you've heard that before from other consulting firms, but in this case, you have the detail behind it. You don't just have a workflow. Personnel insight and observations. We find in these interviews, sometimes your employees start crying and they hug the interviewers before it's over. They feel like they've got a voice finally. I love that part.
Paula, have you ever encountered anybody down in the basement with a red swing line stapler?
That was you, wasn't it?
Like Office Space? I don't know, Office Space joke, sorry.
Yeah, no. Actually, I don't do these process studies. It is that elite group that understands people and understands the subject matter. The teams are created specifically for your organization, right? Which is great because the employees, I'll give you an example in energy. We did this for land departments, land administration, which is very much task driven. And those were the ones that cried the most. And they felt like that their employers finally gave them a voice to give their opinions and to improve their job. So I love the people side of it because I just think that we sometimes forget about those people that are working hard at their desk every day and may not get noticed. Anyway, to move on, backup gaps, segregation of duties, etc. This was no, you can go. We're good. Thank you. Process by the numbers case study. This was a very large construction firm. They actually asked us to interview 102 of their employees. This is not normally what we do. We can do it obviously, but normally we take it department by department. And so it's in small sprints, if you will. But they had heavy manual processes, closed cycle issues, inequitable labor. We do a utilization chart when we do these processes, and it shows you how many hours they spend doing what. And sometimes you'll see, let's just take, for example, a supervisor and a manager should not have desk time. They should be managing people and processes. And so their utilization at a task should be lower than an accounts payable clerk who's constantly moving invoices through. And so the utilization for an entire department is pretty awesome to see. I didn't include that in here. I probably should have. Anyway, for this team, they needed these actions, and so we did the process by the numbers. And I'm not going to read this all to you because most people don't like that. So, but we made recommendations. And we automated the automation opportunities here for manual tasks with 75 to 80% time cost savings. That to me was the best part because it was technology. If you don't need technology, our process people and our audit people are the ones who come in and they help you realign tasks. Then the competencies at the bottom show you who we used. We used F&A advisory, human resources, org design people, process optimization, project management, and of course our IT team. Any questions? I just thought I'd include a case study so to give you a.
Paula, I have a quick one, and it actually gets back to office space, like Scott was saying. You know, you mentioned that some of the employees will cry, hug you, feel like they finally got a voice. Do you have the opposite with some employees where they're sort of clammed up and they feel like, okay, this is the Inquisition, and I can't say anything or my job's on the line? Do you deal with some of that emotional aspect of it as well?
We do, but I've got to tell you, Brian, rarely, because the teams that we put together are people interviewers. They understand the nerves. They're not flamboyant or loud like I am. They're soft spoken. And the questions are soft in the beginning. There's a methodology to them. There's a psychology, if you will, to them. And then they're asked, I'm sure you guys have had these questionnaires before where they ask you the question 5 different ways, but it doesn't seem like it's the same question. So there's methodology to that too, and they loosen up. And the subject matter expert helps them open up by explaining that they've been in their shoes. So those are all very helpful to help the employee open up. But we've had occasionally some, and just for the supervisor manager types, just to let you know, once we do the interviews, the interviewee is given their interview documentation so that they can verify that everything that was said. But their supervisor is also given that documentation so that they can verify that they're not lying to them, that it doesn't take 4 days to do a certain task, So there is some balance to it as well to check for for veracity, if you will. So great question. Like I said, I don't do this process. I am the beneficiary of this process for technology purposes. And so I've only heard of 1 or 2 times I think they've done this at least, over 40 times for different clients. And the clients come back and ask them to do another one for another department is what normally happens. Right now we're doing one for a very large global company. We've now interviewed Norway and Australia. So it's been very interesting. And our clients have embraced this process. Thanks, Scott.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, we're going to transition a little bit to more thinking more specifically about, to take these foundational exercises and reviews of processes in the bigger picture, and then to take a sliver of a look at a real specific kind of an offering that you can deploy. And I'll tell you that someone mentioned to me once that they wanted to go live with a virtual card program. And the last minute they said, we've decided we're going to take an ERP review, and we want to know, should we wait until that's done? And I said, my recommendation would be to do it now, because if you're like me, let me explain to you, I've got a project at the house that my wife's been wanting me to do, which is to replace some shrubs in the backyard. And I live by the mantra that if a man says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. You don't have to ask him every 6 months, right? So, here it is 8 or 9 months later, and I haven't changed the shrub. So I've been considering my options. So sometimes it's best to just go plant the shrubs, right? So, and with a solution like a virtual card solution, it's helpful because when you think about implementing, it's nothing nearly as, and I use the word gently, Paula, painful, if you will, as it is to take some deeper dives into the bigger picture of things. But Brian, how are we on time? I want to make sure we're mindful of everyone's time this morning.
We're still doing well. I would say probably have another at least 20 minutes, 25 minutes even if we need it.
All right, good. I'll try to make the best of those. But so someone, might say, and by the way, if you all, the folks that are on, I would be curious if you would enter into the chat, whether you have ever in the past or maybe even currently are using a virtual card program. I'd love to see what the group's usage is in this space. And also, if you would, I'd love to hear what about that process was really excellent and what about it was maybe not so excellent, looking back, what could have made your life better or what maybe wasn't so great. But by the way, if I say anything here in the next few minutes and you think to yourself, well, no kidding, Scott, we already know that we're not dumb. Just know that I don't think that, but I want to share some things that are for rudimentary in the interest of assuming that, maybe not everyone knows it, but
Scott,
when you think about virtual card, you go ahead, Brian.
Would you maybe define virtual card? Maybe just to level set on that?
Right. I'm going to take a moment. So if you think about, like all of us probably have at least one, maybe two credit cards in our wallet or purse. When you go, let's say to Academy and you buy $100 worth of sporting goods and you use the card to pay for it, you leave with that $100 worth of goods or services, depending on where you're buying. Your card gets charged that $100, but then the bank or this Academy rather, they're going to net $97 probably, somewhere in that 2.5% to 3% range, right? They're going to forfeit that 2.5% to 3% of revenue so that they receive those monies the very next day, right? When that settles that evening. And they're happy to do that because that's a heck of a lot quicker than waiting for a check, right? I mean, most stores don't take checks from consumers, but generally speaking, right? That's the way we used to. I remember carrying a checkbook in my wallet. I had a wallet checkbook, right? Back in the day. Some of us can relate to that. And, anyway, thank goodness that's not a thing anymore. But that 2.5% to 3%, though, it goes back to the bank that issued that credit card that you used, right? So that's why they provide you with points, cash, things like that. So that's the basic of how that transaction work and where those monies go. Well, that's virtual card is essentially that, but on steroids, to use a really overused term. It's on, that on steroids. It's done at a macro level, but in an automated way. Does that make sense? I think we're all on board with that. I think it's fairly basic kind of a concept, but well, we'll talk more about that here in a second. I'll try not to double my effort and time on it, but people think about, hey, why would you employ a virtual card solution? And generally speaking, it's going to be for one of three reasons, right? You're looking to create efficiencies. And again, that's by reducing the number of these physical paper checks that you're writing and processing. And if you're like me, you're thinking right now, oh boy, every week when we do that check run, I've got all these checks and now I got to take them and I've got to go take them and get them signed. Now I got to come fold them and stuff them and put the postage on. We got to get them to the mail. And, when you stop and think about it, there's a lot of time invested in that, certainly in people, hours. So you're trying to create efficiencies and reduce the number of those checks that you're processing. You're thinking about fraud exposure. You want to reduce the fraud exposure. I'll tell you that in 2020, 74% of organizations experienced fraud exposure and 30% of organizations saw a jump in the amount of fraud that they experienced. And by the way, 61% of the fraud that was executed in 2020 came via the AP department. And so that might either be AP personnel whose computers were taken over. And I've got a lot of stats. I always like to joke. I told Missy the other day, after we were throwing some stats around, I said, Missy, I got to say, lastly, 87% of all statistics are entirely made up. But the stats that I just gave you right now are real, and I can share the source on those. But bottom line, creating efficiencies, reducing your fraud exposure, and then certainly generating new revenue. And Brian, you mentioned earlier, it's not really about savings. It's really more about a new revenue stream because you've got to pay vendors. You're already doing that, right? So wouldn't it be great if you could do something you're already doing, reduce the amount of time you're doing it, but also generate new revenue? And for most companies, when you think about the idea of realizing $100,000 in profit, depending on the type of business you're in, there's an outlay on the front end of that, right? You have people, supplies, materials, time, whatever that you're outlaying in order to go do that work and then charge that client and then realize that $100,000 profit. In this case, you're not doing any of that. You're just paying your vendor. And so it's kind of neat to go, it's one of those things where like, what's the catch? Well, there's typically not a catch. I'll move on to the next slide. I talked about check fraud. Again, there are many, many ways of doing this. Certainly, we always think about fraudsters. Boy, if they just would invest that energy into a legitimate business endeavor, they'd probably be ruling the world. They might be someone like Bill Gates or whomever, but there are many, many ways of doing it. But check fraud is, it's very fraud exposed. And again, when you reduce those, you reduce that fraud exposure. And Missy, I don't know, I'm unable to see the chat because of the wompy way that I have loaded this today. So I apologize, but has anyone talked about having used it? Okay. Is it the case that no one on the call has ever done it? So if you've never done it, have you at least considered doing it? Have you taken a look at this at one point? And if you did, but haven't used it, I'd be curious why you didn't move forward. But going back to credit cards, again, I think a lot of us know this, but maybe we don't realize the timing of it. In 1966, Bank of America issued the first credit card for multi-state acceptance, right? That was a game changer, going interstate with this. And it became Visa. And in 67, the four California banks started MasterCharge, which merged with Citibank's Everything Card, was renamed MasterCard. And again, as we all know, Visa and MasterCard are the two major sort of credit card brands, if you will. And we partner with Visa. And in the 70s, you started to see the electronic system replacing paper systems and what they called hand grinders. And I remember as a young man growing up, my dad was a pharmacist, and we had a retail presence in his pharmacy. And I mean, we were a little late to the party because I can remember well into the 80s, seeing my mom or my dad or one of the employees up at that, register with that big, the racking machine when they put the little triplicate on and they'd drag it over and make the imprint. And it was a whole thing. And they even had suction cups that would stick on that table. You didn't have to worry about it moving on you. But we were a little late to the party. That was well into the 80s when we were still doing that. But a little bit of a look back. And I think most of us remember those things. Think about the traditional types of plastic credit and card products that are out there. Certainly think about a commercial card or one card. Ultimately, these can be used. They're the kind you carry around in your wallet. You keep them in the top drawer of your desk, right? They're available. That number, though, it stays the same. It's always there. And there's an ongoing balance that lives on that card. You have some cards that are a little bit more specific to the idea of travel and entertainment. There's a variety of nuanced reasons why that's kind of a different sort of a product. And this isn't really in the world of commerce. This is in the world of finance and banking and institutions. There are fleet cards, as you may well know, right? For folks that don't, though, that have certain limitations that can be put on so that someone deploying that card can only buy gas or maybe water, right? Or some items, they're not buying cigarettes or Doritos and things like that. And obviously there are some prepaid products that you can deploy where you say, hey, look, you can use this for whatever you want, but once it's done, right? You only get so much money per month or per week or per diem, and then you can deploy those. But just a broader look. And again, I would assume that most of us on the call have had exposure with those, both certainly on the personal level, in the workplace. Then you start thinking about what's a virtual card or a single-use ghost account. There's really kind of a couple of when people talk about virtual cards, they're usually talking about one of the two things we're talking about here. One is a single-use ghost account. Again, so where that card that you carry around your wallet has that number, that credit level stays the same. If someone gets their hands on that number, they could deploy that and use it to buy themselves a nice speaker system for their bed or their living room, right? But it's a little bit vulnerable, certainly, right? That's why we're all very careful with them. But a single-use ghost account is literally a scenario where you have a number associated with one payment. And once that payment is transacted by the receiver or the vendor, that number disappears into thin air and it goes away and can never be used again. And by the way, it was only good for the amount of that payment. One-to-one reconciliation. You think about sometimes I hear people talk about ghost cards. And what they mean is it's a number that just exists on paper and it functions like a regular credit card, but it's not a plastic or a physical card you hold on to. To me, that's not really a ghost card or a single-use card, but some people talk about it. So if you hear people talk about it, it's good to clarify what they mean, and that might be what they're talking about. Any thoughts or questions on that at the moment before we go any further? It's pretty basic, but nonetheless, I find I'm amazed, or not amazed, but it's interesting to see who maybe had no exposure. Okay, again, in the interest of thinking about, hey, how does all this work? And again, with the idea that we all use them, but sometimes maybe we don't stop to think about it. Again, at the top of this circle, you have the card issuer. That's typically going to be a bank, financial institution. Certainly, they're always going to be connected to it. Brian, am I right? You're an Aggie, right?
I'm a Husker, but I've been adopted by the Aggies.
Okay, well, you may have a big card in your pocket with a big Nebraska red N on it, and that might be through the Nebraska Alumni Association. But there's a bank that's backing that, certainly, right? So They're truly the issuer, if you will, in that case. You might have a Southwest Airlines card, same thing, right? You got that from them, but it was issued by a bank. Pretty basic idea. And then in this case, when we think about AP, obviously there is what we call, it's used, the term supplier is often used, but really that's who you're buying things from. They're supplying you with a good, but ultimately it's, your vendor or who you're buying from. And then you have this network, right? You have the rails. People, sometimes merchant processing is a little bit of a mystery. So if you think about the company that issues that card and issues that credit, you have the people that are selling things to you, thus you're buying from them. You say, how does that information get between that merchant and to that institution? It's through what we call the rails. It's simply either going to be the Visa rails or the MasterCard rails. Obviously, you have the person who has that card, and then you have that institution that receives those payments. So fairly simple, but just identifying who all the players are when you talk about deploying this for AP. Regardless of who you're going to work with, and you'll find that there are banks in this world of virtual cards. You'll find that there are fintechs that are even bringing some of this to bear. One thing to keep in mind with fintechs is that they're not a bank. They're generally going to have, they're kind of an intermediary. So sometimes they won't always have the same robust security measures that a bank will have, because by nature of what we do in the world of banking, things are very, very secure. We have things in place to prevent fraud. Sometimes fintech companies don't have those same measures in place, even though they're partnered with, their backing may be a private equity group or something like that. So not to say that they're awful, just to say something that's a differentiator. But regardless of who you might be working with, the process is going to look very similar to this. So you're going to have an enrollment campaign. Let me stop for a minute. The first part of this is the idea of saying, let's take a look at who you're buying from. Let's take a look at the vendors that you're using, how much you spend with them, how often you're making payments to them. And so then it's a matter of saying, with that information in hand, let's run it up against and analyze it against what we know about the environment of vendors. Who among these vendors that you use will accept a credit card payment, right? Once you've identified that, there's going to be an enrollment. I'll touch on this a little bit more, but there's going to be an enrollment campaign where someone's going to reach out to your vendors and engage them to find out, will they accept a card for payments? Even if you think you're going to ask them. You got to get their permission. There's a variety of ways that goes. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the ways, what I think are the best ways to do that.
Scott,
then you're going to create.
Is there much vendor resistance these days? Because I would think, my hope is the answer is no, because it seems like everyone's trying to go more paperless because it saves time, saves money on both ends. So are the vendors saying, no, we really, really want you to keep snail mailing us checks, please?
Right. Well, some people will. And the approach is generally to make the ask, Brian, right? So, hey, Brian, this is Scott Podsim with XYZ, just calling to make sure you guys would be willing to take credit card payments for future invoices. So now we get to the crux of your question. They usually have an answer to that very quickly, a policy. There you go. Maybe I needed a third cup of coffee this morning, but they have a policy where they either do or they don't. But what we find is that generally, with smaller vendors, they're a little bit more willing to take that, right? Because that 2.5% to 3% haircut they're going to take is less impactful at the smaller levels. And sometimes they're a little bit more, they need those funds quicker, right? Their option is to wait, the average of 5 days to receive that check. And then, another day or two to get it into their bank, versus having those funds the next day. Sure, we'll be happy to take that because we get the bulk of those funds much quicker. At the end of the day, my recommendation would be that you find a partner that isn't cajoling anyone. You shouldn't be going to, a bank or a fintech should not be going to your vendors and saying, you should really do this. So you're going to do it, right? Or you're not leaning on that vendor. That vendor is very important to your business's success. So it should be a matter of asking them, and they either do or they don't. There's a lot more people that will, and generally, I've had people say, well, Scott, isn't that going to impact our terms? Well, it might, it may not. And what we'll do, and I know you need to find a partner that will ask that question. And then if a vendor says we will, but you're going to need to pay us net 30 instead of net 60. what we do and what I would recommend you find a partner does is take that information back to you and allow you to make that decision, right? So you might say, gosh, we like the idea of paying in that 60. And then you say, well, what's the advantage to that, right? You keep your money longer, and you can typically, the idea is you're trying to yield more return on, in kind of interest-bearing scenarios that you might have in play. Well, cost of money is pretty cheap right now. Generally speaking, what you'll find is with a program like this, it's going to pay you back at basis points that could wind up netting out more return than that savings yield would in your account. So it might make sense to say, yeah, let's pay them that 30 and let's get that revenue share back. And we're going to come out to the good or in a better situation. But to answer your question, more people accept than you believe they will. And if you don't accept cards, that's fine. For your business's payments, you may not receive payments like that, but don't assume that other people won't, because a lot of people are happy to do it and you shouldn't say no for them. But most people do, and it's really booked into the cost of their goods and services. I'll try to be more quickly in answering questions next time, Brian. I saw I was a little verbose there. But once you send that payment file, which is a list of the vendors you want it, so you're doing a check run, right? Well, the day you're going to do a check run now, and by the way, we're not going to convert all of your checks. No one's going to convert all of your check payments into a virtual card payment. So there's still going to be check payments. So you do that check run, and then that same day you pull those vendors that we've told you they will accept this payment. You send us a file that says, okay, today I'm paying Acme Yo-Yo Company $13,000 for these 3 invoices, and here you go. So your partner's going to receive that, and then they're going to execute those payments. They're going to send an email remittance to all of the people that you identified as being in receipt of payment. Again, with those details, and I'm going to show you in a second, specifically this invoice for this amount, and it'll have your logo on that remittance. They get it, and they're taking these from a lot of people. It's very very simple. And then that email is sent out. They process the payment. That card number goes up into nowhere. It sort of floats away and it's gone. Can't be reused. And then, there's a reconciliation. There will always be a reconciliation piece that you can then take back to size that up and understand, hey, which payments have been made, which payments have not been made. I talk about this payment file and the idea of an email remittance. This is a sample, again, regardless of who you might be using. It should look similar to this. You'll see off to the left over here. In this case, you have a vendor ID, you've got a vendor name, you have the invoice numbers you're paying. And you'll see we're friendly companies, we're paying 3 invoices, right? The date of those invoices and the amount. So when friendly invoices get theirs, you'll see off to the right, hey, look, there are those 3 invoices that we talked about from the payment file. There are the individual invoice amounts, and then there's the totality of it. So in this case, it says it's from Commerce Bank. It would say it's from your company, and you could have your logo on there. Typically, partners are going to have that capability. That all makes sense, fairly straightforward. It's a lot to go through and trying to get this, assuming that some people know some of this and maybe not everything. I want to cover this thing at a high level. All right. Best practices. These are the questions that you should ask anybody you're engaged with if you were to ever consider a virtual card program. And I'll try to touch on these a little bit, but so we talked about enrollment earlier, right? How do they enroll them? I.e. what communication vehicle? That's really what that means. Are they calling them? Are they emailing them? Or are they literally sending snail mail to them? And when I say, are they sending them a phone call to ask them, hey, Brian, good morning. This is Scott. I'm calling on behalf of XYZ company. And then having a conversation. And by the way, if they're having that conversation, are they recording that conversation, right? Furthermore, instead of doing that, are they sending those clients an email in hopes of engaging them to ask them about whether or not they will enroll and accept card? And or are they sending a letter to do that? My suggestion would be to you that phone calls are absolutely the single most impactful way, because it's not unlike your intuition. If you're like me, you get emails all day long, you don't know who they're from, you immediately hit the delete button. You assume that it might be some guy somewhere in a faraway place trying to fraud sneak you or whatever. And if you get mail, I get my mail delivered about once a week, and oftentimes less frequently than that, because it sits in our mailbox downstairs. The point is, those aren't typically very effective as it relates to really engaging if I call you and I make a direct ask of you, I'm more likely to get a yes because I'm more likely to get your engagement to begin with. What size vendors are they going to enroll for you? Okay. So what you'll see in the marketplace is that oftentimes people say, hey, Brian, and Brian, you're my client today, right? I'm going to use you over and over. Brian, we're going to enroll every one of your clients between $1 million of annual spend a year on down to $250,000, maybe $150,000. And you think to yourself, that sounds pretty great, right? Well, and that's not bad, but what I would tell you that what we see in the marketplace is that the smaller the spend is with someone, and this is fairly intuitive, right? The more likely they are to accept card. So the further down in size you can find a partner that will go, the better it will be for you. And again, I'll use a quick, I'll just say that, we go down to $10,000 of annual spend. Well, there's a lot of vendors in there. So the reason that's viable is there's a number of times when we're in a secondary position, and I don't want to talk about us, but generally you can have a provider you've already got a program and someone's going after your vendors from like $1 million to 150. And then you have another provider that's going after those that are between 150 down to 10,000. Typically what you see when you have that secondary program provider, because they're going to that small spend, that can mean literally double or more what you're getting on your primary program. I've seen anyway, there's a number of examples I can give you, but generally speaking though, you need to be asking them what size vendors are they targeting for you? And the further down they go, the better it's going to be for you. How quickly do they do this? Go ahead, Brian.
Just to draw a comparison, common practice is probably to go after the largest, what is maybe considered from, like my brain would normally say, that's the lowest hanging fruit. Let's go talk to the biggest vendors, the ones that we're spending $1 million with, $500,000 with. Let's talk to them. But best practice is actually to almost go the other end of it, right? To get down to the smaller vendors, because they're much more likely to say, yes, we'll accept card. And you get volume from that, which then would cause higher cash rebates or something to come back through.
Absolutely, right?
Okay, I understand.
You hit the nail on the head, Brian. Absolutely. I'm bringing you you're going to ride shotgun on my next call because you got this. How quickly are they going to do this enrollment, by the way? So what I see a lot of times is that these enrollment campaigns, they drag on 5 or 6 months. Again, I will say we conduct all of ours in 30 days and we do everything via phone call, but I'm not here to tell you should use us. I've got a lot of great dad jokes. I'm a very charming guy. We're good at this, but regardless of who you use, find out how quickly they do it, because, that can really slow you down. That can create more pain. You're like, well, we're all excited. Let's do it. And then 6 months later, you're like, when is this thing going to happen, man? I'm just growing weary of it. And then finally, who handles that enrollment? And ideally, it should be your partner. I have seen some instances where there's some folks out there where they're getting you to do some of that as well. It should be you. And by the way, if they're doing it, if your partner's doing it, what does that really mean? Is it people that work for that partner of yours, or is it people that are a third party? And by the way, is that third party onshore or offshore? What hours of the day are they really up and available? Those are all little things, but they can make a big difference. Personally, all of our people work for Commerce Bank and they're in Kansas City Central Time Zone all day long. But and then here's another one. This is a key thing. What percentage of enrollment do they achieve relative to the sizing that they told you or that they provided you? Do they generally come in higher than they told you? They generally come in lower, 6 months later. So that gets into that when I talked about a little on the last slide, we're talking about the sizing. So mostly what you're going to find is that people are going to take your vendor list and they're going to run it up against the Visa or MasterCard list of accepting businesses. The little nuance and it's really a big nuance that's lost out of that is that, let's say you're a company and you've got one client and that client will only play you card. So you're like, all right, we got to go set this up so we can accept card from this client of ours. Guess what? Now you're on the database, or that company is on the database as accepting card. But what it doesn't identify is that you only take it for one client and you generally don't never take it for anyone else, right? So a lot of times a partner in this space that's going to be bringing a virtual card product to you, they will oftentimes just look at that basic database. And if your vendor is on that list as accepting card, they're going to assume that they'll accept it from you. That's really not a very nuanced measurement. And so I think it's good to ask people, so, all right, Joe Blow, this sounds great. You just told me you're going to have 25% of my vendors that are going to take this card payment. How many took it the last time you told someone that? Oh, what's that? Only 15% of them took it? Wow. Okay. So you sized it high. The reality was much lower. That's an important detail. Just ask them. I mean, no one's perfect. No one gets it right 100% of the time, but it's good to know how often they're right and to what extent they're right. All right, not to beat that dead horse. Again, we talked about this a little bit. I won't spend a lot of time here, but and again, you'll have this deck to look at. But again, make phone calls, record those calls. Use a proprietary database. I mean, we use a proprietary database of people we know that make business to business or accept for business to business payments, not just generally do they accept.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Scott, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
It says, in the end, I don't know if I fully understand the question. In the end, isn't who has the most transactions? From Don. Maybe Don can elaborate a little bit what he means there.
Oh, that'd be great. Don, are you still on?
Still on. Sorry.
Oh, there he is.
So my question was really regarding, who do you target? Which vendor? Isn't it the one with the most transactions for the P card?
Well, generally speaking, it's really about spend. And what we have found is that whether you pay somebody once a year or whether you pay them 96 times a year, in our experience, if you spend between $10,000 a year up to $1 million a year, there is a very, I'm going to use the word high level of acceptance. And that might seem odd. Now, you're not going to, let's say you had 12 vendors with whom you spent $1 million or $999,000, $900,000 a year with. They're not all going to take it, right? But above $1 million is where they generally, you start to see a very high level of decline, where they say, nope, we won't take card over $1 million. So again, it's more about the volume of revenue versus the amount of payments. Now, in some cases, I will say that there are vendors who say, when you ask that question, will you accept a card payment for future invoices? The answer is either yes, it's no, or it is yes with these conditions, which are, we'll accept that payment for any payment below $25,000 or below $50,000. So to your point about the number of payments you're making, that can come into play in my experience when it comes to their conditional acceptance. But what we can do is we'll share that with we share in your partnership too. Hey, we found out from so-and-so that they will take it, but only if you pay them below, make a $50,000 or below payment. Well, okay, great. Guess what we're going to do? When we make payments, we're not going to combine all 4 of those invoices because combined, they all add up to $60,000. We're going to separate that into 2 payments, and thus they'll fall below their threshold and they'll accept. Don, I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer it though? Did I address it right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
So here's another piece though. Again, they always say the devil's in the details, right? So those questions I shared about things you want to ask them about the way they enroll, I would also ask some questions about customer service. So what I see in the marketplace as a general rule of thumb is that people, institutions, fintechs will tell you, we're going to get you this much of your check's been converted. And then when they're done with the enrollment after 6 months, it's really about here. And I hope you can see on the screen, I'm going down. And then the program starts after 6 months. And then over time, it starts to kind of nosedive off the program, right? What happens is those vendors decide that, you know what, this is a pain. I don't want to take this anymore. Because when I have a question, no one knows, I don't know who to go to help me resolve this question. So what you need to ask them is, who's going to support you when you're doing this, right? So let's say you've got this implementation team and they're right there with you. They're like, hey, Mark Kerr, I'm your guy. I'm your buddy. And then after implementation's done, they hand you off to Paula Rhinehart. And you're like, man, Scott was great, but Paula, welcome to the party. What do you know about us? And you're like, well, I talked to Scott. He told me everything. Well, Paula, if she's going to be your relationship lead after implementation, she needs to be on the call with me from the get-go so that there is a real meaningful understanding of the genesis and all of the details that were discussed while you're implementing. And that person needs to be there. And ideally, again, it should be a person, a single person, not some 800 number that you're calling for a support call center. This is the big one, who's going to support your vendors? So let's say you send that email remittance and there's some question. The vendor gets this and goes, this invoice number is off. I'm not sure if this is right. Well, they should be directing those vendors to call them. And I'm saying your partner, whoever your partner is, should direct your vendors to reach back to that partner when they have questions so that they're not bothering you or your team. Because if that's happening, it kind of defeats the whole idea of having a partner help you create efficiencies, right? If you're spending time answering all these questions, sometimes you're going to have to get involved, but generally speaking, they should be directed back to your partner, and that partner can handle that question. How quickly will it? Yep.
I have a comment in the chat.
Oh, go ahead.
It says from Chris Ruffner, it says, one of my clients used Ramp virtual cards. We noticed two primary challenges. Ramp keyed available credit line once a month based on cash in the bank. With frequent fluctuations in cash balance, this was often disrupted to monthly planning. From a practical standpoint, it changed how the upfront approvals work versus regular AP process.
And Scott, quickly before you answer that, just wanted to let you know we probably have about 7 minutes left.
Okay, I'm going to thank you for that. I think that was Brian, whoever said that. Thank you. And whoever asked the question about the credit limit scenario, I'm going to try to address that if I understood it correctly. If not, please reach out and I'd love to talk about it. In my experience, what typically will happen is, if there's a line of credit issued for a program like this, it's important for your partner to understand your business. And right, let's say, for instance, there's a measure of seasonality to your business. And if there is, that means that, let's say you gave me a $100 million spend file, and I told you that about 12 million of that we can activate into this program, right? So the way I would approach that, but I also knew that, between May and August, your business was really big. In other words, it's not wise for me to take $12 million and then divide it by 12 to get a monthly spend or whatever the metric I might use. It's valuable for me to do that, but then to go, okay, I need to go up and bump that up. So when I'm talking to my underwriters about this unsecured line of credit that my client needs, I'm mindful of the fact that realistically it needs to be up here, because there's going to be times where their need is well below that, but I don't want to have to stop and get another line of credit issued on the fly. And I'm not gonna, we have that happen occasionally, but that's rare. We try to get ahead of that. I would recommend that your partner be someone who is just thoughtful enough to think about the seasonality. And that's usually what drives, in my experience, these problems where there's a credit limit. But if I didn't address that, please reach out on the side. I'm happy to give some thoughts about ways to address it better with more time. How quickly are they going to handle those inquiries? Hey, I left you a message last week. I had someone tell me the other day that their expectation is that based on the program they have today, boy, if we could just call back within 2 weeks, that'd be great. I was like, 2 weeks? You're going to hear from us that day or the next day by 11. So, again, it goes back to the thing about don't assume the level of service you're going to get. You need to ask about that. And again, how quickly, the same thing, are they going to handle those for your vendors? And revenue share, this is fairly basic. Again, it's worth asking, because you'll find in the marketplace partners who provide a service like this. Some of them will only pay you annually. And Missy, I think you told me that the place you came from does that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Whereas some will do it quarterly. I know some will do it monthly. We do it monthly, right? I believe that, you know how to spend your money better than we do. And by the way, are they giving you actual cash, or is it credit towards some other work that you're doing? Some things like that. I kind of went fast. Here's the last slide I'm going to show you. And these are some things to think about too. Okay, ultimately though, it's a partnership. If anyone comes in and says, hey, gosh, Mark, we're going to do all the heavy lifting, man. We are going to make your life so easy. All you got to do is sign this contract. Well, that's false. They're not replacing your AP department. There's going to be some effort that you have to exert to make this go. It's fairly nominal. It's much less than a full ERP integration, but you're going to need to think about the things on the left. There's going to be someone over there who's your champion, who's a rah-rah cheerleader, who's on board and who gets it and is going to run it down the line. Again, think keeping accurate records of your vendors, sending payment files. You're going to have to upload those payment files. You're going to have to keep flagging your vendors in the ERP, right? that's another thing I talk about, enrollment. A lot of people are going to do one enrollment and then that's that. And then maybe 2 years later, they'll do another one. Find a vendor that will continually enroll in a perpetual way. As every business adds new vendors every year. So those vendors need to be approached about it. So, but you're going to have to then go back in and flag them in your ERP as the receiving of that kind of payment. Again, it's not a lot, but there are things you need to do. Your partner is going to be responsible for doing the things on the right. So hold them accountable. Again, you'll have this slide deck. I'm going to end it there. And, Paula and I are both reachable and certainly eager to be a resource. I'm going to shut up for now. I had like 3 other dad jokes. I didn't even use them. So I'm going to leave it at that.
So Scott or Missy, I have one question that I'm just curious, and if you can kind of generically share this, if it's okay. Do you have any like extremes? Like, okay, this is sort of just in what you've actually seen done, and you can only refer to what you've actually seen, not what everybody else does in the virtual card world, but where you've come in and there's been an approach to really get to those smaller vendors, back to the comment or the question that I had for you, common practice versus best practice a while ago. What kinds of extremes have you seen for cash coming back in kind of that new, if you will, revenue stream? In reality, maybe kind of an average, low end, average, and high end, some cases that you've really seen happen where you've come in after somebody else already did a virtual card, and what did you find?
I'll give you 3 quick examples. And one of these is 2 of these are going to be where we were the primary provider, but one was a large construction company, and they're very self-performing. So they buy a lot of things in order to execute the work they do. We identified $37 million of the spend that they had out of about $370 million worth of paper checks they were running every year. We identified 37.6 of it that we knew could be converted into this kind of payment. After we executed the enrollment campaign and calling all the vendors, right? The saying is don't say no for them. We asked, $54 million of their spend said yes. So in that case, we said here, and when it was done, it was up here. That would yield them a return of about $640,000 a year in revenue share for just doing something you have to do anyway. Another example I'll give you though on a smaller end is I had a client who gave me a $12 million spend file. And we want, and again, I'm not trying to tout us, but what I've seen, I can only speak to what I've seen. We found like 28% of their spend. So all of a sudden, this little bitty spend file yielded a measurable return. On average, about 10% of check spend across all industries we see are convertible to the program. The last example, Brian, is there's a healthcare system with which we are the 4th program. That means literally there's 3 other providers that are already leveraging their check spend. We came in as the 4th provider and found $61 million of opportunity because, again, if you focus on those smaller ones, so from $10,000 on up. So I hope that answered your question with some case studies. That
Scott, what does that extra 61 million, how much extra cash to that, I think you said it was a medical organization, what's that turn into for additional cash for them?
I'm not going to lie to you, but I would venture, because I don't know the specific number, but I would venture to guess that it's probably in that, we're talking about million plus probably.
Oh my
like a
gosh.
spitball or close to it.
Very meaningful.
I mean, it's very meaningful. And again, you got to pay people. You're not doing anything you aren't doing already.
Right.
Anyway, that's that.
Well, we were just about a minute past. We usually try to make sure that we're done by 9 o'clock. But I don't want to prematurely end. If somebody has one final question for Paula in the Boxley group or anything for Scott and Missy with Commerce Bank. Okay, well, seeing none, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Hopefully you learned a few things about areas that can be automated and some thought processes to go through that and some best practices and ideas there, as well as virtual cards, what they are, and maybe some neat opportunities there. With the roles that we collectively have across the different companies and industries that we serve, we're in positions where these kinds of things can really matter as to how we design and redesign departments that we work with or lead. So hopefully it's good information that you can use. And then I also encourage you, please follow up with Scott, Missy, or with Paula to get any additional questions answered that you have, or if you need some help kicking the tires on something you have going on, that's the idea, is to make, leverage the networking that we're doing so that you have someone you can go to get some answers.
Great.